Everyone, we're excited to be here this month. The way that we're gonna do this is I'm gonna call on you, and if you can just say hello if you're comfortable, share what ward you live in and what street, that would be great. So, and if you're just visiting from another ward, that's lovely as well. So we'll start with Linda. Hi, Linda.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm from Ward 8, Hungerford Terrace.
Great. Hello, Jean.
Hi, I'm Jean Hopkins, Ward 1, live right off of East Ave at Co-housing.
Hi, Amanda.
Amanda's muted.
Okay, so I'm unmuted now. Hi, Amanda Hannaford, and I am just joining in to listen to the candidates. So I'm an interloper. So thank you for letting me join.
Awesome. Happy you're here. Hi, Karen Long.
Hi there. So I unmuted myself. Is that correct?
Yes.
I'm good? Okay. Hi. Good to see you. I live on Henry Street, and I hope that this goes well. You've got a lot of people coming tonight. That's exciting with the candidates. Thanks for doing all the work.
Thank you. Hi, Sophie. Okay, I'm just gonna move on. If Sophie can unmute herself later, that's great. Hi, Jim.
Unmute myself. Hi,
realize I got promoted to panelist just for saying hi, I guess. Old East End, 21 Chase Street.
And last we have Karen. Hi, Karen.
I'm assuming, are you talking about me or are you talking about the other Karen?
You.
Well, thanks. Hi, Karen Paul, City Councilor, Ward 6. I'm just here to check in and see how Ward 1-8 are doing. And so I'm like Amanda. I'm an interloper and interested in the conversation this evening. So thanks for letting me join you.
Okay. Thank you for being here. So I think that's the list, and then we have our counselors and candidates who will introduce themselves later. So now we're gonna go into speak out. So if anyone has anything they'd like to share with the group, please raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute you. So yeah, thank you. I see Jean has their hand up. You should be able to speak.
So Jean, you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Yes. I just wanted to let everyone know that I attended a wonderful webinar with the League of Women Voters last night on, it's called League Electoral Reform with Rosemary Blizzard, who's with Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. And they're very eager to bring ranked choice voting to the rest of the country. So, and they're watching state by state what's happening. So I was able to tell them a little bit what's going on in Vermont. So that's it's called Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, or you could go to rcvresource.org, but I wasn't able to get on that way. So go to Resource Center. Yeah. If you want more information, just email me.
Great, thank you, Jean. Again, if anyone has anything they'd like to share during Speak Out, please indicate by raising your hand. I'm not seeing any other hand raised, but I know Carol, you have something to share.
Yeah,
So
I have a couple of things. We got a letter from Jared Wood, who lives on 164 Henry Street in Ward 1. And the subject was fire pits and public safety. So city councilors, just, I know you've been discussing this. So if you can just have this as part of your talk with us, that'd be great. So this is Jared's letter. Recently, the concept of backyard fire pits was introduced at a Burlington City Council meeting on Monday, the 5th of October. It was presented as a warm outdoor gathering place to encourage social gathering habits. Since you have a full meeting tonight, I will be brief. Fire pits are not safe. He gives 2 bullets. They are a health hazard due to smoke. They are fire hazard due to flying sparks. Thank you for your consideration. So that was Jared Wood from Henry Street, Ward 1. My second issue is about a voting project for our new American neighbors that Pat has been really an important part of helping implement. This was a project that Aden, Haji, and I initiated. Aden is our Ward 8 school board commissioner and a member of the New American community, grew up here in Burlington. So anyway, the outcome has been that we are running 2 Zoom meetings for folks to be able to link in and join. We had one last Friday and we have one this coming Friday. We break out into 3 different breakout sessions each night, each with a different language. And at each breakout room, there is an interpreter in that language. There is an election expert who helps answer questions, and there's a tech host that helps show the videos that are often in the translated language. Because we were in between meetings and Aden and I were hustling to get this project off the ground, we wanted to support the interpreters who we asked to do this service for us. So I went to each of the wards, the NPAs, and went to ours, and our 2 wards, Wards 1 and Ward 8, agreed to support this project by spending $200 each in support of the interpreters who are working for a couple of hours each night. And they're also helping us publicize the meetings. Last Friday's meeting was 3 languages, French, Nepali, and Mai. We had no participants from French, but we recorded the session anyway so that it can be, people can link onto it and be able to hear it who were not able to attend the meeting. The other 2 meetings, the Mai and the Nepali, were attended by about 6 people. And just one couple final things. So I really, really appreciate the support of the wards for these projects. I think it's a really important message to our neighbors that we value their support and we value their interest and involvement, and they are very eager to register to vote, and if they're registered, learning how to navigate what's become a pretty complicated system. We did learn that the Mai, particularly, and my understanding is that the Mai don't have a written language, so it's particularly challenging. And so what we found was that in many cases, the Mai elders needed their youngsters to help translate information to them, including the ballots. We do now have ballots that have been translated, but we understand from our election experts that people can bring someone with them to interpret the ballots for them at the voting booth, as well as, of course, at home. So hopefully that will help involve more folks from our New American community. Thank you again so much for your support, and please send any questions that you have. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you for sharing that, Carol. And I see that Karen Long has their hand raised, so feel free to speak.
There. So I want to echo what Jared Wood said, and I also have talked to him on the phone and emailed with other, mostly Ward 8 residents. And I don't like the idea of open fires in our tight neighborhoods that just for air quality and safety and just managing it just seems kind of impossible. We have a lot of really small yards, and I think especially in wards 1 and 8, it's not appropriate. Maybe, like, I'm from California and we were never allowed to have fires in our yards, but we could go to the beach and do it. Or there were parks that had, more like for grilling kind of fire pit things. So I could see if it was managed like that in open spaces, it might be okay, but I'm really against it being in our neighborhoods. I've lived here a long time, and I know that also when people run out of things to burn, they take coffee tables and couches and chairs, and we have seen those be lit before. So I just think it's a really bad idea. So I hope, I don't even know where it stands or what, but I hope it's not going to go forward. And then I believe that BHS students are offering to pick up your leaves. The city's really working hard to keep the leaves off our storm grates so that they can work properly and we can have less runoff of, stormwater going into Lake Champlain. So if I'm understanding that right from Front Porch Forum for community service, they'll come around, and I think DPW will at least do it once where they'll pick up the bag leaves. So I just hope everybody will think about that. Like, I really am getting more and more concerned about the quality of our lake And which leads me to my last thing, that there's so much yard parking. And I'm frustrated. I've sent emails to our counselors. I've sent emails to the CD&R committee, and nobody responds. There is demolition by neglect, which means landlords are just not even taking care of their stairs. They're not painting their buildings, which is a lead safety issue. And the parking on the lawn and parking across the sidewalk is just unacceptable. And I'm pretty frustrated that people don't even write me back, and my own counselors who promise landlord accountability are also not responding to me. So I don't know. I don't want to give up. I like this neighborhood. It's been a great place, but I sure get frustrated walking to City Market and to the schools and all the different places. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Last call for speak out tonight. If you have anything to share, please indicate by raising your hand, or if you're having difficulty with that, you can just unmute yourself. Anyone else? I am not seeing any, so we're gonna move on. We are going to, Karen, do you have your hand raised because you have something else to share, or is that left over from before?
How do I unmute myself?
You're good now.
I'm good. Okay. And sorry, I have just one other thing. With the sidewalks, we got that extra money. And my understanding was they were going to really take care of the trippers, which were ones that were like 2.5 or 3.5 inch, from one level of a sidewalk to the next. And I recently wrote Chapin and Robert and sent him pictures of several sidewalks that are still really bad tripping hazards. And, again, I don't even get responses, or I don't get it. So where do we stand with that? Because I'm talking about, a 3-inch jump up from one level to the next, and especially on Pearl Street, right next to the Health and Rehab Center. It's been there a long time. I said it again, the season's over. They didn't do it. And I have tried to push people in a wheelchair over those big step ups, and it's really hard. So I don't understand how we're just letting that go another season. Maybe they're saved till the spring, but I don't know who tracks this and who holds the city accountable for fixing these really bad hazards. They're not just cosmetic, they're hazards. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Jonathan, yes?
Karen, if I could just respond to that quickly. I did get a response from Laura Wheelock a month or so ago about the survey. Every 5 years or so, they supposedly do a survey, and they're supposed to be measuring all the sidewalks in the city this fall. And it's probably worth following up with her again and seeing what the status of that is. And I can send her a note and let you know if you want.
But these are old. These are old.
I know.
I know. The survey is going to cost another $150,000, $160,000. Why aren't we repairing the ones we already have instead of finding? Anyway, that's all. But I will. Yeah. I know. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I can't answer that question.
Right.
But I think that I think following up with Laura, and I can do it because I've already checked in with her.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you everyone for that speak out. Now we're gonna move on to the council updates. We're already running a bit behind. So Jane, Zoraya, and Jack, if you all want to decide who wants to go first, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anybody has a preference. I don't mind starting off. We're all gonna cover a lot of the same stuff in a way, but we'll try and each not overlap too much. So we've had 2 council meetings since we last met. a big topic and theme that has been going on has been the Racial Justice Alliance, the protests at Battery Park. That went on for, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but like 33 days or something like that, over a month, well over 30 days. And that was a pretty incredible thing to witness and be part of. And there was a lot of conversation as a city regarding why those people were occupying that area for so long. And I felt very deeply about all of it. And I think we've all learned a lot and we are continuing to learn. But with that, I just, and I'll let Councilor Hightower elaborate on anything that she would like to on that front. But we did pass a separation agreement with Sergeant Jason Bellavance, one of the 3 officers that we wanted to remove from the, or rather there were demands of the 3 officers being removed from the police department. And so that separation agreement included a $300,000 kind of buyout payment and 18 months worth of health insurance. And he was, I think, effectively resigned on October 5th. So that was a pretty big deal as a city, and it kind of helped, I don't want to use the wrong term, but helped kind of bring the protests to a close in that regard, but it doesn't end the topic by any means. We also approved the question of ranked choice voting for the March ballot. So that will be a question for voters to decide on in March. And let's see. So we, as a council, we went through a training of regarding executive session, but most importantly, open meeting law. So that was good for all of us and anyone involved with that conversation. So that helped clarify the legal justification for bringing certain individuals into our executive sessions, and kind of walking away from that training with the overall lesson of, when in doubt, be as transparent as possible, and many other good takeaways from that. So that I thought was really good for us to go through as a council. And then out of that too, so now moving forward, the city will be posting ahead of time the legal justifications for going into executive sessions. That's for everyone to see. And then also who specifically will be involved with those meetings. And then we talked about, let's see, I don't want to take up too many. We've only had 2 meetings, and they weren't too packed, so I don't want to. But I do want to address the open fire pits, and it's wild to me that this is kind of like the big thing in the city right now in terms of feeling like it's very 50-50. And so I just wanted to update folks. As of today, Bill Ward has informed us that the Burlington Board of Health has discussed the backyard fires at their meeting that they had last week, at their regular meeting. And actually tomorrow they're having another meeting to vote on a response to give to us as a council on Monday regarding that. So it's kind of like a recommendation or something that's more specific and would give us more guidance. And they do have a public forum, so if anyone has strong thoughts on this, which I'm hearing even tonight, I would highly recommend that if you have the capacity. This is taking place on Zoom, and I don't mind sending around more information about that if you need it. But yeah, that's kind of all of what I have, but I'm happy to fill in anything if we miss anything. Thank you.
I'm happy to jump in next. Yeah, on the fire pits, and I'm sorry I missed the beginning of folks' comments, but on the fire pits, I was educated by the emails that were sent to me in terms of, some of the health things, because my first thought was like, oh yeah, this seems like a good idea. Maybe it's worth it. And then enough people reached out to me that I discussed with the caucus putting it in front of the Board of Health. because I don't know enough about the potential health impacts of recreational fires. So looking forward to their answer. On the safety part, I would love if folks who have a safety concern reached out to the fire chief, because I don't know how much he talked to the Councilor Shannon, who is the one who sponsored this, but it seems like he's okay with it. And I feel like a fire chief tends to be risk averse. So I'd love to hear more about that concern, because I don't think that's something that the Board of Health will address. I think that if there's any thoughts and communication around that, would love to have that be talked through with the chief before it comes back before council, if folks have time for that. And racial justice, just a quick update. We have an RFP out for a community visioning facilitator, which we're really hoping will be beyond even racial justice or policing, but will be kind of a comprehensive look at what our community wants public safety and quality of life to look like in the city of Burlington, and what that means. And just then to go look at what we have and see where there's a gap and how we can address that, if we have the resources to address that, and so on. So that's the process I'm pretty excited for. The Joint Committee has also started looking at an assessment of Burlington Police Department in particular, which I'm working on revising right now, along with Kyle, who's the new Police Transformation Director, and the vice chair of the Joint Committee. And then the last thing is just, I also recently joined the committee for Burlington Schools and their review of the SROs. And the first meeting is unfortunately next Monday, so I won't be able to attend because it's at the same time as a city council meeting, but we'll keep folks updated on that process as well. I guess I just want to quickly respond to Karen, because I heard you and I'm sorry. I'm not great about responding to people if it's not an email that's directly to me. If there's anything specific ever that any of you need, it is helpful if it's directed to us, because sometimes we are copied on these very long email chains from very many people for many different topics. So it does get a little bit overwhelming when we have 50 emails with lots of different emails. Not that that's your fault and that we shouldn't respond, but if you ever do have a direct ask, I think other than that, we have all these committees and we're diligently working, and Jack will talk a little bit about one of the parking things that we're working on, but we're diligently working on things at a more systemic level. So there's an individual problem with a certain house, do write us if like staff isn't responding to you. But I've also tried to respond, and I've gotten responses from landlords saying, this isn't your job, you're not enforcement, do not write me. And so if there's something specific I can do, I'm always happy to do it. And other than that, I think we're trying to address things kind of on a bigger picture level, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't be responding individually. And if there's specific things that you want or need us to do, please just say, Zoraya, can you respond to this question, or can you do this thing? And I promise I will try to respond to that email. And that's my update. I also have some updates on just cause eviction, but I also don't want to take up too much space or time, so I can loop back if we have extra time. But other than that, I'll let the floor go.
Thanks. I'll try to go quick and we'll see where we're at. So yeah, just kind of going off of what Zoraya was just talking about and responding to Karen. We did have an ordinance committee meeting last night, Karen and everyone, and we've got another one a week from Thursday, or 2 weeks from tomorrow. 2 weeks from tomorrow on the 29th at 5:30, and there's several items of interest there, but we did discuss at length yesterday, and I've been working on with Councilor Busher and Gene Bergman for well over a year at this point, a policy to try to deal with these parking issues on rental properties that Karen was referring to. There's a lot of backyard parking and parking creep, and this has a lot of different implications, but we're working on a policy that would require landlords to clearly inform and post for tenants, both in the lease and on the property, what the actual parking plan is, who's allowed to go where, and have that laid out up front when folks are considering, entering into a lease. That way it'll hopefully reduce and minimize the confusion and the non-compliance with parking issues. So that is something we're working through in ordinance, and we'll take it back up at our next meeting. We also just began a discussion that I'm super excited about, which is landlord licensing. I think many of us in wards 1 and 8 are pretty aware of some of the landlord negligence issues that we have, and I think licensing is a mechanism to help hold landlords accountable and ensure that they're up to our standards if they want to be able to continue to rent in Burlington. And then couple climate items. So Winooski Avenue, I'm sure folks saw, got redesigned this week. It's basically done for south of Pearl Street. And we're going to initiate the process soon for north of Pearl Street. But that's one of our highest crash corridors in the city. And I think it's a lot safer now, and got dedicated bike lanes and some traffic calming features. So if you haven't gone downtown, definitely check that out. And then one other climate policy, something that I work on, is decarbonization of buildings. So that policy is moving forward to ordinance committee that would basically require any new buildings to not be hooked up to fossil fuel infrastructure and for heating and for appliances that they wouldn't use fossil fuels. So that policy continues to move forward to ordinance committee. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left in this portion. So if anyone has any questions for the counselors, any brief questions, you can raise your hand and we can quickly do that. While we wait for that, I do want to make a comment. I'm stepping out of my steering committee role and into Ward 8 resident. This isn't a question. I just want to take this opportunity to say it to the 3 counselors. I really do respect the idea of making systematic change, and I think you're all working really hard at that. But I will say you were elected by wards 1 and 8 constituents, and so it would be my hope that you would be willing to respond to those constituents, and you would put a strong emphasis on doing that and seeking out those emails, because at the end of the day, you all represent the city, but we elected you for 1 and 8. So that's not like a criticism. I've just been hearing a lot of individuals reaching out to me as well, saying they haven't been getting a ton of responses from the council. So I would just hope that maybe we put a stronger emphasis on that going forward. So thank you. Now stepping back into my role of steering committee, and if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. We're still waiting on the next individual to present, so we have some time.
And sorry, I just want to say one thing in response to that. When I said systemic, I didn't necessarily mean Burlington wide. I mean even things like systemically addressing things like the parking and the degradation of housing. And again, I don't think that that's an excuse, but I think this has been an inordinate amount of times, like just in terms of the amount of emails that counselors are getting. From what I hear, being a new counselor, it is unprecedented. So not saying it's an excuse, not saying we shouldn't. I think you're right, Hannah. I think we should be responding, but just bear with us as it's an unusual time for us to be counselors.
I see Erica, you have your hand raised if you'd like to ask a brief question.
Yep, give me just a second here. I apologize for that. I am just curious. I thought it was interesting to hear the idea about the carbon, new carbon fee that they want to add to, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with my video. The carbon fee that's going to add $7,000 over some period of time and basically make it more expensive to build here, thereby making rent more expensive. And I find it very strange and curious that we're seeing our city councilors make decisions and spend money on things that will only increase rents and make it even more unaffordable in Burlington. Can you speak to how you intend to address the increase in cost for housing?
You're muted, Zoraya. If you were trying to speak, I'm happy to as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the first crack at this. Are you talking about the carbon neutral for the heating of new buildings? I'm not sure what you meant with the carbon tax.
Yeah, that's what Jack just mentioned. That's one great example of things that will only make it more expensive here. And he mentioned it as a win, but for affordability in Burlington, can you speak to how you intend to address the rise in costs that will be inevitable?
Yeah, I am aligned with Jack in thinking that that's a win. I think that Burlington does have two distinctive issues, both in terms of the environmental things that we have to think about and the cost of housing. And I don't think that they're as coupled as as maybe it sounds from what you just said, just in terms of there's a host of things that go into cost of housing and especially the cost of our housing stock as a whole. And so I'm not saying that this won't increase the cost of our housing, but I think not doing environmental initiatives is not the only way that we have to reduce the cost of our housing and to make Burlington a more affordable city, would be my take on that.
I can respond as well since I had raised the issue. So I don't actually think that creating new construction to be able to be heated through electricity or geothermal or other heating sources other than fossil fuels, I don't think that that's actually more expensive. And which is why I think we haven't heard that pushback when we've had various public meetings about this. So I haven't heard that from developers that it's more expensive to build buildings that doesn't take natural gas versus ones that do. Right now, natural gas is cheap, so that could be an argument that the fuel itself is cheap, but that's different. That's distinct from the cost of building is the fuel. And what I would say to that is that we can't afford to continue to rely on natural gas well into the future. So when it comes to developing new projects, we shouldn't make an investment in something that we're going to have to abandon. And that's kind of the idea with this, is that given that we've committed to getting off of fossil fuels by 2030, if we're creating new infrastructure that we know we're going to have to later convert off of fossil fuels, that's essentially a wasted investment. So it makes more sense to invest in the infrastructure that we know we're going to use for decades to come, which is not the fossil fuel economy.
Well, you mentioned electric. How do you propose to produce enough electricity without fossil fuels to heat those buildings, given that we already don't produce enough power at the McNeil power plant right now?
Well, Burlington Electric Department is 100% renewable and does power the whole city. So I don't know what you mean by we don't produce enough power.
We don't produce enough power from renewables as it is. We use a tremendous amount of gas still, and we cannot support a huge infrastructure build without some kind of a change to our power structure and our ability to produce power here. So I'm just curious, if all new construction is going to be on electric and we're going to start converting people to electric, how are we going to produce enough power? Are we going to burn more wood chips?
So for electricity, we don't use fossil fuels in Burlington.
Okay.
For electricity. So, I mean, we will have to, as we electrify, we'll have to increase production, but we can continue to use renewable resources for that, as we already are.
So wood chips, we'll keep burning more wood chips.
That's one of the sources right now, but there's also wind, solar, hydro, any non-fossil fuel resource.
Where do you propose to put wind turbines? And
I'm not proposing anything right now. I'm just letting you know the mix of renewables that are
Okay,
available.
I guess my point is I just wanted to really highlight how the decisions that are being made are making things more expensive here and not less expensive. So just something to consider. As I know, the three of you are very sensitive to the cost here. You talked a lot in your campaigns about making Burlington more affordable. So I would just ask that you take that into consideration in your decision making.
Okay, I think Jean has their hand raised, so let's go to them. We're just waiting on Mark to log on, so it's kind of why we're having more Q&A tonight. But Jean, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I think a lot of homeowners are installing solar panels. And here at Co-Housing, we actually earned $6,000 last year from Burlington Electric because we were supplying the city with so much energy from our solar panels. So I think solar panels are coming into being.
Yeah, and I think we see with a lot of the, switches to other types of power like solar, the upfront cost might be more expensive because you're really up front loading that capital cost, but then, you're saving on fuel and things like that over time. So I agree with Jack and Jean that it's not.
But that capital cost is being borne by the taxpayers.
Erica, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you. It's the councilor's time to speak, so we're just going to wait for the Senate debate later. But thank you for that comment. So does anyone else have any questions for the councilors before we move on? Seeing no hands. I'm not seeing the school board here either yet, so I think they may be in another meeting. So let's just move on to the state Senate candidates that are here. As we indicated in our email to you, you'll have 5 minutes to introduce yourself, tell us what you would like. I'm going to be keeping time, so don't get offended when I cut you off if you go over it. So those of you that are here will have an opportunity to go, and then when everyone is together, we'll have a short Q&A. We did a random generator of who gets to speak first, so that's what we're going to go off of. Tom, we're going to start with you if you are prepared for your 5 minutes.
Certainly. Can you hear me?
We're not supposed to.
Yeah.
So great. I would be glad to tell you about myself. My name is Thomas Chittenden. I'm running for state Senate. I work in District 1, so I'm at the University of Vermont. I've been there off and on for the last 20 years or so. I currently have an office in what's now the Ifshin Hall, so next to Calkin. So definitely I spend a lot of time in Burlington, or at least I used to before this pandemic. I grew up here in Chittenden County. I have 3 kids. I'm living in South Burlington on Dorset Street, and I decided to run about last February because I just had too much free time. So I figured I'd take something else on to it's my standing joke, but it's hard to get a laugh on Zoom. No, I decided to run because I hadn't heard enough of our elected officials advocating for Vermont to grow. I was looking at the census predictions for this coming 2020, and it was for the first time in our state's history, looking to have fewer people in 2020 than we did in 2010. And so I just wanted to hear more of our elected officials advocating for opportunities, investment in people to be attracted to the state. How to do that? That's the big question. I have some ideas. Happy to talk about those things. So one thing is growth. The other thing that I decided to run on is regionalization. I'm on the South Burlington City Council. I'm currently serving in my 3rd term. I've been really excited about some efforts that we've done, like regional dispatch. I know it's hit some rough patches, but I will say it's still moving forward gradually. And I think there's a lot of value in continuing to look to collaborate across our town boundaries to achieve efficiencies and also to get better outcomes at lower costs. So I was really sold on regional dispatch when our fire chief, Chief Brent at the time, said we will get to emergency calls 60 to 90 seconds faster. Those are critical seconds when it comes to an emergency. So looking at ways to streamline across our boundaries and also better be able to support during massive incidents the 911 calls that come in through regional organization is of great value. I see opportunities to do that in other areas. I definitely, one thing that I've talked to Burlington a lot about in the press is the airport. I think we could have better decision making over that airport with less friction if we looked at a regional authority, which is a common practice that's done in other with other airports, both in the region and across the country. And we can look at stormwater and other things. I'm passionate about climate change and addressing the climate emergency that we're in and taking steps to, I didn't start my clock, so just give me a signal when I'm coming up on my time. Happy to talk about things that I've done in my different roles. I was really excited. I was the former chair of the Green Mountain Transit Board, the immediate past chair. And during my time, we did add our first 2 electric buses. And that was a large help because of the leadership of the Burlington City Council, which, by the way, I'm on the City Council in South Burlington. So to the 3 councilors speaking, it's a lot of work for no pay, and people are always mad at you on the City Council. So thank you for everything you do. And with regards to email, Zoraya, I have the same policy. If people individually target an email to me, I'm responsive as fast as possible. But when I get the blast from everybody, I read them, but I usually defer to the chair. And so the chair is who I expect to respond to those. And that's my standing policy that I tell people, just out of survival mechanism. But I hear you. We need to be responsive, and just know when people individually respond to me. That's my current policy. So I have the same. I'm happy to talk more. I have a website, thomaschittenden.com. You can find out more about me and contact me there. So I talk about other matters. And I also, I pride myself on being as accessible as possible. So should I be successful on November 3rd, I really hope people reach out to me. The best part of elected service is talking to people. The worst part of the meetings that go until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, but that's neither here nor there. Am I close to the 5 minutes, or should I continue to meander through a few other points?
You have 2 more minutes left.
Great.
If you'd like to share.
So I can talk about some climate initiatives that I've done in different capacities. So also while on the Green Mountain Transit Board, I actually asked to serve on that board because I was working at UVM and we had implemented an automatic vehicle location system. So we had Track It. Basically, students could see where the buses were on campus to motivate them to take more public transportation to get people out of their vehicles. And so that's why I asked to represent South Burlington on Green Mountain Transit. So I take no direct credit for actually getting the 2 different systems we had in place at GMT, but I will say as a board member and as chair, it was a constant priority for me to commit to developing the technologies that make it more convenient to attract choice riders. We have more to do. We have to do things to get people out of their vehicles. And from a county perspective, I want to see us to invest in amenity-oriented park and rides. As we start to look at the onset of automatic or self-driving vehicles, I think we're going to further exhaust and put pressure on our existing road infrastructure. And so we need to think really thoughtfully now, how do we get mass transit and public transit to be more attractive to those that have the choice as to whether or not to drive an individual vehicle or a personal vehicle. And if you can make it more convenient for them to park along a major transportation artery. So I would say like the Richmond Park and Ride, think about adding amenities so that it's even more attractive. Imagine if we've started to orient with public businesses or have grocery stores that would start to use or multi-use their parking spaces so that we can provide convenient locations where people can get a cup of coffee while they wait or use an amenity while tracking where their public bus is coming to them. So I want to see more investments in technologies that do that. I have some other ideas on the website. I feel like I'm just filling time now. Happy to take
You're
questions.
out of time as well, so if you want to wrap up. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Now, I'm just going to keep going through whatever candidates are here just because things are a little wacky based on schedule now because of individuals not showing. But Erica, now you can use your 5 minutes if you're ready. I'll do the same thing as Tom. I'll give you a thumbs up when you're at your 1 minute mark, just so you have an idea. So feel free to start whenever.
You. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us, all of us candidates, to be here to speak with you and your constituents today. I too am a Burlington resident, so I especially love the Burlington NPA meetings because I get to see what else is happening around the city. So that is really nice. Most of my campaign, I really have been focusing on affordability issues here in Vermont. And the reason I'm focusing on affordability issues and the economy is because those things tie in to everything else in our lives. The economy, the ability to get a job, have a good job, and pay bills is the number one thing that a person can do to help ensure that they have good mental health. I know that sounds crazy. There's a lot of other things you need to do, but 30% of suicides are because of lack of employment and lack of opportunity. And so we see a lot in our current legislature. They're trying to pass gun control and they want to do all of these different things. We want to take care of the climate. We want to take care of everyone. And so we're passing all of these bills, and each and every one of them costs a tremendous amount of money. What that does is it puts a stranglehold on businesses, small businesses, and the middle class. Because the middle class, the reason we say the middle class bears the burden of a lot of these policies, the climate initiatives and things like that, is because they're the ones who make enough money to be paying taxes, but not enough to not be harmed by the volume, by the amount of taxes that they're paying. So as an example, my husband and I together combined on our salaries don't make a six-figure income, but our tax rate is 60% here in Burlington, and that's our property taxes, which we don't get any kind of a homestead exemption because we rent out part of our home. So you see, for someone like me, and a lot of people who are in the middle class, people who want to raise families here in Vermont and here in Burlington, they cannot do it because our current legislators have such big hearts. Okay, so Vermont, I'm a Vermonter, born and raised. I was raised to be a good steward of my state, of the environment, of my resources. As an accountant and small business consultant, I've learned to help other people be good stewards of their resources. And I think that that would go a really long way to make sure that people felt like they could actually stay here and make it. When we're having to further tax the wealthy, which is basically anybody making over $50,000 a year, it's just taking more and more. And that's why so many people are leaving. So in fact, Vermont has it was mentioned earlier, Vermont, we have a negative population growth, and it's because people can't afford to raise their families here. People can't get good jobs here. Something like, I can't remember, it's a huge, more than half of our college graduates leave within 1 year. So we're spending all of this money. They get to vote in our elections, so they've become invested here, and then they leave after a few years. What if we actually made Vermont, what if instead of being 49th in business friendliness in the country, we were number 1? And people, those college graduates could stay and they could get good jobs and they could buy homes and they could afford to pay their bills and for food and things like that. What if that was the Burlington and the Vermont that we cultivated? You know, we already sequester carbon. What that means is we already recycle more carbon back into oxygen than other states in the country. So we are already a carbon sequesterer. I don't think that's good English, but whatever. So we're doing a really good job. But if we had a little bit more money, a little bit more tax revenue, not more of your tax dollars, but more tax revenue as a whole from businesses and individuals, we could pay for the failing infrastructure in Burlington that's dumping 3.5 million gallons of raw sewage into our lake every year. How about
you have about 30 seconds left if you want to wrap it up, please. Thank you.
That's it, Hannah. That's all I've got to say. Thank you very much for having me this evening.
Great. Thank you. And now, Phil, if you want to go, you have 5 minutes. You can use it however you would like. I will warn you at 30 seconds, and then Once all the candidates speak, we'll do a Q&A at the end. So thank you.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Phil Baruth, one of your 6 Chittenden County State Senators. And I think if it's all right, I'd like to use my time to talk mostly about the state's response to COVID-19. So I know everybody's tired of hearing about it, and I guess I would say I'm almost tired of talking about it. But the things that I'd like to get across are that the federal government did get us money in the form of 2 basic federal bills, COVID CARES funding and ESSER funding. The CARES funding is time sensitive, and it has to be not only earmarked, but spent, money out the door and completely spent by December 31st. So that's mostly what Senator Pearson, Senator Lyons, Senator Sirotkin and I have been doing over the last 6 months, is trying to make sure that we don't wind up with money on hand when December 31st comes around. So trying to get that money out to people who are in need of unemployment, people who need help keeping their small business open. Schools needed money for PPE and other expenses having to do with gearing up to prevent reinfection when they came back in September. So on that note, let me just give you a couple of specifics. So all of this, as with you and your family or you and your workplace, we had to educate ourselves on how best to spend that money. I'm currently chair of the Senate Education Committee, and so we brought people in to testify, and they, to a person, told us they thought the most bang for our buck in terms of keeping kids safe was upgrading HVAC and air handling systems in Vermont schools. Because as anybody who's done time on a school board will tell you, HVAC systems are deferred maintenance almost everywhere in Vermont. That's really, really bad news if you're trying to keep kids from being infected, and not just kids, but teachers and staff who are in the building all day. So what we did was we designed a program to be run by Efficiency Vermont, and we funded that program to the tune of $13.5 million. So initially, $6.5 million got spent very quickly. Efficiency Vermont did a great job, and so we re-upped with $7 million more. So let's put aside BHS for a second, because the problems there are different, serious, but different. But for other schools in the county, if HVAC work is being done or air handling is being done, it's being done through that Efficiency Vermont program where they triaged people's needs, queued them up, made sure contractors were in the pipeline. All of that work is going to be done by December 31st, which is an amazingly efficient and quick moving operation on the part of the state. The other thing I'd like to make sure to mention is that before COVID-19 hit, we had already last year passed a bill mandating lead testing. And if you cast your memory back a couple of years, you'll remember that in Burlington, we had some alarming lead tests that came back from the Sustainability Academy, if memory serves. So Tim Ash, Senate President, working with my committee, we put together a program that would eventually commit $3 million to testing every school and childcare in the state of Vermont. And then if problems were found, that $3 million paid to remediate the problems so taxpayers, local taxpayers, didn't have to pick up that tab. So that is now the strictest lead standard in the nation. So between that and the program for air handling, I've been working overtime on health and safety for a couple of years now, intensified obviously by COVID-19. So that's a quick intro to the kind of things I've been doing. Look forward to getting into other issues, criminal justice reform being one of them. but I'll save that for later in the hour. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to Ginny. So again, 5 minutes, then we'll do a Q&A after everyone is done. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Hannah. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's just too bad it's remote. Maybe next time it will be in person. As you know, I have been in the Senate for many years, and I currently chair the Health and Welfare Committee. I'd like to just talk a bit about some of the things that we have done during the COVID experience. We, in the Health and Human Services area, had $275 million from the federal government to apportion across a broad range of areas and needs in our state. And as Senator Bruce has said, that money must be spent by December 31st. And it has to be spent according to federal guidelines. So we may have some ideas about how to spend that money, but we need to adhere to whatever the federal government would like. We spent many weeks struggling with how to spend the money. We spent many weeks trying to understand what the implications of the COVID epidemic have been to our state. And I think you've seen the benefit of some of our work. And that extends to public health initiatives, it extends to access to health care, and it extends to a reduction in the number of infections that we've seen in the state. So we've all worked together on that. One of the really confounding areas that we had to work on was food security and ensuring that people who need food are getting it. What's happening now with the federal government, we put $4.5 million of federal dollars into our food bank and farm to plate and other local sources for food for people, whether you live in Burlington or other parts of our county. What's happening now at the federal level is the federal government has taken away the contract. I don't know if you've heard about this, but is taking away the contract for local food distribution from our local distributor, the Abbey Group. And what will happen when that goes away is we'll no longer see fresh local foods going to schools and to people through the food bank. That's a huge concern. So we have to ensure that we can get that resource back, that our local food will be available. And when that happens, then we know that that supports the businesses of our local producers, so our local farms. My work in the Senate has been very much related to environmental issues, public health issues, healthcare. My own professional background is as a biology professor, and I bring my scientific perspective into the Senate. And I believe that is very important so that we do have evidence-informed and evidence-based decisions. That becomes critically important when we look at things like climate change. And I was very interested in the conversation that you guys were having a few minutes ago about having better weatherized homes or having heat pumps installed rather than other sources of heat energy. You know, putting a heat pump in is going to save dollars, and we can see that over and over and over again. But then just as an aside, one of the programs that the Agency of Commerce and Community Development has put in place as a result of the work that we've done legislatively is to have a renter program. So folks who own rental units are now eligible to apply for up to $30,000 to have those rental units weatherized. That's all to the benefit of the owner, who now has an improved property, but it's also to the benefit of the folks who are renting because it will save money over time. And we know that to be the case. And as that weatherization occurs or as improvements take place, we will also see a movement away from fossil fuel and toward renewable sources. So the area of healthcare obviously is huge within our budget. It's over 20% of the budget. And it is something that we continue to work on to try to lower the cost of healthcare in our state. One of the things that I worked on, and I want to give a shout out to Senator Pearson because he's very much involved also in drug importation. We worked on a drug importation bill. The federal government is supposed to have rules in place so that Vermont can go to Canada and import drugs. The federal government has been dragging its feet, and surprise, surprise, but we're also seeing some movement through the federal government, through the HHS, the Health and Human Services, to put rules in place. The work that we've done on climate change has pretty much focused on.
I'm sorry, that's 5 minutes.
Uh-oh.
We have to go to the next candidate.
Darn. Okay,
Yeah.
but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chris, we'll go to you next. And just for anyone else who has joined, 5 minutes to introduce yourself, use the time however you would like. And then once all the candidates have gone, we'll have a Q&A with everyone. So Chris, whenever you are ready.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. Hello, everybody. Chris Pearson. I'm one of your incumbent state senators, finishing up my second term, and I live right here in Ward 1. It's great to see at least some of you and see more people watching. I think when I think about the discussion tonight, you know, the federal politics and the Trump headlines and it's just so much, and it's so overwhelming and often so upsetting. I think it's understandable, and I experience that people are not as focused on Montpelier. State politics can seem kind of irrelevant, but as you've just heard from my colleagues, we have been really hard at work. And during the pandemic, we've been working to keep people safe, protected not just from the virus, but from evictions, safe from hunger. Senator Baruth mentioned lead in schools, but also in childcare, universal testing across the board. I think that's something we can be proud of. We've been working to keep childcare centers open and give parents a safe place for their kids to go. Outside of COVID, we've pushed in the last few years to make investments in clean water, creating dedicated funding without raising taxes. We've boosted wages. Senator Sorokin takes the lead there, but all of us backing him up in a year and a quarter, our minimum wage will hit $12.55. We've worked to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. Backing up Senator Lyons, we have pushed to make abortion a right in state law, which is maybe a good protective move, and in fact kicked off the process, a 4-year process to get it as a right under Vermont's Constitution, dealing with the uncertainty at the federal level. Let's just leave it there, I guess. Senator Baruth has taken the lead. We backed him up on gun safety. I'm very proud of those sweeping changes, something we've done more than any other time in history here in Vermont. We've enacted bans on police use of deadly force, and given a greater role for citizen oversight and law enforcement. The ACLU Vermont said that the strongest use of force law in the country. We passed language that I wrote around wiping out people's marijuana records for 10,000 plus Vermonters. It's gone. Now that it's a legal substance, this is important. Getting people back to work and getting them access to licenses and so forth. Worked with Senator Sorokin and others on small business portal, making it easier to register your small business, interact with state government, on consumer protections. We have finally started to address in a more meaningful way the climate crisis. Vermont lags our neighbors in two bad ways. We are per capita the highest emitters of New England, and we have reduced our carbon emissions the least of our New England neighbors compared to 1990 levels. We have a lot of work to do. My bill to get us to 100% renewable energy actually stalled out because of COVID, but the Climate Solutions Caucus, which I'm a co-chair of, had 4 high-level priorities. We did manage to get 3 of them across the finish line, even despite the pandemic. So I think I look forward to the discussions, probably more meaningful to have questions answered, but I do want to give people a sense that we've been working really hard. We haven't solved income inequality. We haven't solved the climate crisis. We haven't solved racial injustice, but we have been looking at and striving towards fixing and addressing each one of these very, very significant and maybe overdue challenges. And I'm proud of our work, and I would be honored to have support to go back.
Thank you. Now, Keisha, if you'd like to use your 5 minutes.
Sure. Thank you all. It's so nice to see a lot of neighbors and familiar faces. And I just want to give a lot of credit to the incumbent senators, as you've started to hear tonight. You know, Tom and I had a lot more time to sort of be on Zoom with people in the community and check in with folks and plan events than our hopefully future colleagues who are chairing important committees and caucuses and have done incredible work. So kudos to all of you. As many of you know, because you've elected me over the years, I used to serve as your state legislator for my entire 20s, and a lot of the legislation that I worked on was incredibly hard to pass at the time. For example, Monday we celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day in the state. I introduced that bill in 2011. And at the time I was told, you know, people won't know how to engage in retail sales, and you know, the Italian community will come for you and all those things. And here we are, you know, 8 years later, thanks to other legislators who were able to get this over the finish line, celebrating our second annual Indigenous Peoples Day. Independent investigation into police use of force, you know, still not there in many ways, but I really want to commend the legislature. And I think I learned recently that I think Representative Selena Colburn, Senator Bruce, gave you credit for part of the bill that I don't think is celebrated enough, the policing bill, to tie grant funding and other state funding to actually engaging in data collection around race during roadside stops, et cetera. So, you know, that kind of legislation we need to continue to advance, and it is always an uphill battle, but I do believe, since I have not been in the legislature since 2016, the culture has changed, the attitude has changed a little bit. Representative China, who just got on, was, you know, mentioning that on Monday when we both hosted an Indigenous Peoples Day event together. It's still an uphill battle, but I think people have seen that a lot of the civility we take for granted and we think is simply owed to us as fellow Americans is really fragile for a lot of people of color, Indigenous people, marginalized folks, LGBT plus Americans. And so, you know, I plan to go back to the legislature and fight for the same things I've always fought for. And I think do it with a little bit more of the sort of wind in my sails. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think, not having been there before, one of the differences that I see between the House and the Senate is that you can work on a lot of pilot initiatives and really get closer to watching the administration. There's only 30 of you. They really, you know, need you to play ball, need your vote, need to be in touch with you. And so I just look forward to making our state a continued, you know, experiment station for good ideas around climate change, social justice, you know, rethinking government, rethinking how we raise revenue and prioritize things in our budget. And so I'd be very excited to be sent back and to serve you all once again. And I look forward to staying in touch. I'll put my email in the chat if that's possible. I get a little confused with the NPA Zooms, never mind. You all know how to reach me, and you know, I look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Now I think the last individual is Senator Sorokin. If you'd like to use your 5 minutes, however you would like, to introduce yourself, and then after that we'll move into the Q&A section. You're still muted.
Michael, you're muted.
I apologize. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm trying to get rid of this screen here. Hold on. Okay. Thank you. So this will be my fourth run for the state Senate. I have been appointed to serve as the chair of the Senate Economic Development and Housing Committee. And this committee is a committee of wide jurisdiction that leads me to get involved in not only economic development and housing issues, but also in labor and consumer issues, which are really my passion. I worked for about 35 years working for populist causes in the State House as an advocate, ranging from family-oriented issues, consumer issues, environmental issues, housing issues, labor issues. I think I probably represented virtually every union in the state at one time or another. And being chair of the Economic Development and Housing Committee, which again is the Labor Committee and Consumer Affairs Committee, is probably my ideal job. As a committee chair, you have the ability to strongly influence the agenda of bills that come forward to the full Senate. And so to just give you an idea, in the last few years of the kinds of issues that I've taken a great interest in, is I was the lead sponsor for the minimum wage bill and reported that bill on the floor of the Senate. I was the lead sponsor of the paid family leave bill and reported that bill on the floor of the Senate. I dealt with the $37 million housing bill and was the lead reporter of that bill, which resulted in $250 million of new affordable housing in the state of Vermont. I think of myself as a pragmatist, and I like to get things done. And in this committee, I think we've got a lot of things done. And in the last year, what we've really focused on has been COVID-19. So out of the Senate came bills that expanded the unemployment insurance program so that if you had any fear of contracting on COVID in your job, you could refuse to go to work and still draw unemployment. And that, as you know, also led to the potential of drawing an additional $600 in addition to your weekly unemployment check. We also did similar liberalization on the workers' comp program. So COVID is an infectious airborne disease in many cases, and it's hard to determine where you contracted the disease. Did you contract it at work? Did you contract it at home? Did you contract it while you're out and about? And workers' comp requires the injured person to prove that they contracted the disease at work. That's really hard to do when you're dealing with an infectious disease like that. So we changed the presumption so that it would be presumed that if you came down with COVID-19, you would be entitled to workers' comp. It would be assumed or presumed that you got the disease on the job. So these are the kinds of individual issues. I try to represent the average Vermonter in the legislature and not be beholden to special interests, and I will continue to do so. And I hope I have your support going forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So now we can go into the Q&A section. So if anyone who is watching has a question, please indicate by using the hand raise function. If that's not working, feel free to ask to unmute and we can do that as well. Any questions? Carol, yeah.
So as a Burlington resident and also as an employee of the Burlington school system, we're pretty concerned about the PCBs at the high school, but know that they are probably in most of our buildings. And as a state senator, you not only represent us in Chittenden County, but you know there are PCBs in many of the school buildings throughout the state. And since we've had construction budgets not part of, I mean, they've been lessened and decreased over and over so that it's tougher and tougher for school districts to fund their own construction. And now we add the PCB issue on top of that. I'd be interested in hearing your feedback about how we can make that a shared burden, since it's one that no district really can handle by itself. Thank you.
I can pick that up if that's all right. So that is obviously the $64,000 question in Burlington right now. And as I mentioned, I'm chair of Senate Education. So when I found out some weeks ago that this was going on, I tried to begin motion in Montpelier to get all the information necessary, but also to start the wheels turning, hopefully to try to help fund remediation and, if necessary, transfer of the students to a different location. So just to quickly state what I've done so far, I did have a long conversation with Dan French, Secretary of Education, and I think he and I are both of the opinion that CARES funding is not going to work for this. But I mentioned at the top of my participation tonight that there's another funding bill called ESSER, which is Elementary and Secondary School Resource something is the acronym. Basically, it's money that's not time sensitive and that's grant funded to districts. As Senator Lyons says, it still has to meet certain criteria, but it seemed to me that even though we couldn't probably remediate the PCB problem with that money, it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility that we might use it and write the grant around funding the transfer of students and the fitting up of a new space. So Dan French thought that that made a certain amount of sense. So I called Tom Flanagan, the new superintendent. He and I had a long talk about it. And I believe that's now one avenue that Burlington is going to take up. That is looking to write their ESSER grant proposal around the movement of kids to a safer environment. With that said, I think there's also a problem in that the state standard and the federal standard are dramatically different. So as it stands right now, the standards in most of the building, the EPA standard is being met, not in building F, but in the rest of the building. So the movement is being forced by the much more strenuous state standard. So I contacted Chris Bray, who chairs the Natural Resources Committee. He's now engaged in a reevaluation of the history of those standards and the reasoning behind them, and queuing up a reevaluation of that for the coming January session. So looking at funding sources, looking at a reevaluation of the PCB standards, that's what I think the state can do right now. Obviously, the local school board and superintendent will decide on what's best for the kids in terms of whether they'll be moved out of the building or not. I know they're looking at locations around the city, the old Macy's building being one of them. So that's a quick update. Happy to talk offline more if you like.
Thank you very much, Philip.
Are there any other questions? Again, you can indicate by raising your hand, or if that's tricky, by just requesting to unmute yourself. I have a question, again, stepping outside of steering committee role into resident role. So I would love to hear any of you or all of you speak to how you plan on engaging and keeping your student constituents updated if you're elected. Obviously, we're talking about multiple high schools around the county, but then also multiple colleges. And if you interacted with them during your campaigns, and then also how that will translate when you actually take on the role of senator. So anyone who wants to take that. Yeah, you can go, Chris.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it. you know, I think a lot of us are available online and social media to anybody, young people as well. But I would say that I enjoy very much visiting the county's high schools. There's a great political club out at MMU that gives you a grilling that make you guys look like kittens, really. You know, so I'm very dedicated to that idea, and I'm open and try to get to any time people reach out to me. The trick sometimes is finding ways to engage people that are not necessarily curious, and you know, to that I'm open to any and all ideas. But there are a lot of relevant clubs on issues at most of the campuses in the region, and I think probably all of us at one point or another are accepting those invitations and going to talk to folks that have questions. And also bringing folks to the State House through internships when they're visiting on particular issues. I would say that I've noticed, particularly on the gun issue and on climate issue, the deep impact that particularly young voices have had trying to raise these issues, elevate these issues, and just pave the way for us to make significant changes in policy.
Thank you. I see Jenny, you raised your hand as well. Feel free to just unmute your candidates. You can just unmute yourself and go in that order, however you feel comfortable.
Okay, terrific. So just to echo a little bit of what Chris has said, having internships is great. And I do teach on a regular basis. I'm not teaching this fall because of COVID. But ordinarily I will have student interns come from whatever college I happen to be teaching at, and we'll come in and then meet with the classes at the end of the semester, at the end of the session, and then, you know, it's interesting how that sort of expands. So one person then builds connections with many others, and I think that's important. Visiting with high schools or other schools is also fun. It's also rewarding, and it's also challenging. So each of those experiences, I think, keep us with our feet on the ground.
So I'm just unmuting, and it's Keisha. So I have a team of 4 students working on my campaign right now. We had 6 during the primary, all either paid or getting credit in whatever form works for them. And Skylar Nash, I think, is on the call, who's my campaign manager, who is brilliant and wonderful. And it's just a great group of young people. As I was sort of involved in the campaign and asking people for financial support, et cetera, I said, you know, I'm doing 3 things. I'm paying young people to stay local and to have a future here. I'm investing in the post office, and I'm investing in local press and local print shops. So, you know, at the top of the list was young people and is young people. And I think that inspired a lot of folks to get involved as volunteers to contribute to the campaign, because our community has always loved to see young people thrive and succeed and have a voice. As you elected me when I was 22 to the legislature. So, you know, as someone who's going into the Senate as the youngest woman ever to serve, it's really important to me that we continue to ensure young people feel they can not just vote and participate and protest, which is all amazing and important, but also run themselves and serve on boards and commissions and get as engaged as they want. I try not to mix my political work and my professional work. My professional work is probably where I interact the most with high school students. I do still do a lot of talks wherever I'm invited in high schools around the state. Professionally, I've worked with the Winooski High School and Colchester High School. I'm currently working with Essex High School and Montpelier Roxbury School District. You name it. I'm really involved. I just facilitated this week the new social justice union at Essex High School. I just stay really involved professionally in helping to empower young people to shape the change that they want to see in the state. As we change demographically, we're either going to shape the change or it's going to shape us. And I'm really excited about how much young people are taking the reins, and it is my greatest joy and passion to help them do that work.
Thank you. So unless anyone else wants to respond to that, or if there's any other questions from the floor, Michael, I see you're raising your hand. So you should be.
I would just add a couple of anecdotes. I want to thank Keisha. When I ran it for my first campaign, she introduced me to the Vermont Student Democratic chapter at UVM, and she hooked me up with a woman named Catherine Levasseur, who ran my campaign, who has since become the right-hand person to the Speaker of the House, probably one of the more powerful positions in the legislature. And then I also followed up with that with the next president of the Vermont Student Democratic chapter. And that was a woman named Frances Workman. Both of these women were just incredible, and they really took an interest in politics. Frances has since become a lawyer by clerking, which is a very rare track to become a lawyer, where you don't go to law school, where she works for a lawyer for 4 years, and she's been very successful. So I just wanted to add those two anecdotes. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other hand raised, so I think we'll just move on. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I think this was really like a great thing for everyone to be able to see and for voters to see. Wishing you all luck going into November. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks.
I just arrived, but thanks everyone. I actually was teaching at UVM tonight until just now. So sorry I missed so much of it. Sounds like the last question was about connecting with students, and that's what I was doing. So apologies.
Yeah, of course. So now we're actually going to move into your section, and Barbara and Brian. So you'll have an opportunity, yes, to introduce yourself, 5 minutes to kind of tell us anything you would like, and then we'll go into a similar Q&A type setup. So whoever wants to go first, feel free, and I will give you a 30 seconds heads up when your time is up.
I'm happy to go first if no one else is jumping out to do that. So shall I? Or okay. So I have been at, I can't see who's here and I missed the introductions, but my name's Barbara Rachelson, and I am a state representative for part of the Ward 1-8 NPA, as well as parts of Ward 6. And I'm excited to be running again, and wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been working on that I hope will be able to make further progress in the upcoming biennium. People have talked a lot about COVID and the impact it had on our work, which was very important, and we obviously needed to be addressing it. It's an incredible high priority, and has made Vermont, which already had problems related to very high poverty levels and affordability, even more precarious. So I have been committed. I'm a social worker by training. I have led a bunch of nonprofit organizations, and so I am fiscally, I want to say I'm fiscally sort of tough on making sure we are spending every dollar really wisely. And so a lot of that leads into the work that I care about. I'm embarrassed that Vermont continues to be a state that spends more on corrections than it does on higher education. And I have put in legislation to prohibit us doing business with for-profit prisons, and we'll continue to do that. I think it's unconscionable we're doing that. And we also have other kinds of contracts with corrections where we are charging very high rates to people who are incarcerated for toiletries, making phone calls, our healthcare, so that we could be spending our current dollars wiser. And our recidivism rates are outrageous. There is work to really revision our corrections and who we lock up, and that's really important. One thing that's been really important to me is to be a voice and to speak up for those that don't have lobbyists in the building. So I had a racial impact bill, which I plan to introduce again, that would basically give legislators information on what the policy implications are of legislation on minorities in our state, so that we would know ahead of time if we're doing something that's going to make matters worse, just like you can ask for a fiscal note. I had a student loan bill of rights in that got sort of put on hold because of court case that has now been worked out. So I plan to reintroduce that. That would be a consumer protection bill, because student loans really take advantage of students in lots of different ways. There was interest in a bill I had to have a transgender and gender nonconforming Bill of Rights for students in school, having them be able to be called their pronoun of choice and have access to activities. And I am very vocal and concerned about civil liberties. I supported the marijuana bill, but I'm extremely concerned about saliva even being used with a warrant, and will continue to introduce legislation to get rid of it until there's science or evidence-based information to use it. I had introduced a bill to have the police not use facial recognition software, and I'm happy to say at the last minute, a moratorium on law enforcement using it got passed. But I will continue to put in bills to protect other technology from being used without the legislature's sign off on it, as well as for consumers who get their cars towed. I'm not going to get into details on that today, but some of you know that, or I'm happy to talk to you further about it. And also on items in your house that record you and do things that you don't even necessarily know, and there's no warning label on it. Affordability is a huge issue. And again, the more we can get a handle on more sensible spending, that's critically important. I have talked in this NPA a lot about one school district, and it's that and concepts related to corrections and healthcare costs that I think can really help us keep costs down and make Vermont affordable. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but
We have about 15 seconds left.
So one thing that's been an interesting plus that's come out of COVID is we're continuing to be a state that attracts people wanting to live here. And so that's a real opportunity for us to look at as a state and try to bring green and other types of jobs here and continue to make this a place that people want to move. So thanks.
Thank you. Now, Brian or Selena, whoever would like to go, it will be the same setup.
Selena and I had a virtual game of rock, paper, scissors, and I'm going to go first. I'm just kidding. She asked me to go first. So let me know when the clock begins.
Go.
Hi, I'm Brian Chena. I'm a state representative for Chittenden 6-4, which I share that district with Selena Colburn, who will be speaking next. I live in the Ward 2 piece, the Ward 2 sliver of that district. That district includes most of Ward 1, most of the East End. And I'm running for re-election without an opponent. So I'd appreciate your vote anyway. and I'm here to just talk with you a little bit about sort of my perspective going into this next election. So first, I will say that, I ran for office because I'm a social worker, and some of you have heard this before when I came knocking at your doors or spoke at other forums, that as a social worker, every day I work with people on the individual and family level to address challenges in their life, to adapt to the world in which they live, but not only to adapt and to cope, but also to take action to change the world and to challenge the oppression they're facing. And I could be doing that work my whole life. And with each individual and family I work with, we may create small incremental change. But I recognize that if I want to make bigger change, I also need to engage on the policy level. And so that is what led me to run for elected office. I am a community organizer, an activist, and a performance artist, and I take all of that into my work as well as being a social worker. So, I believe that we need to empower people not only to learn how to adapt, but also to take action against the status quo, which is causing so many of their problems. And the status quo is people choosing between working or staying at home with their children because they can't afford to both work and pay for childcare. And the status quo is people struggling to live paycheck to paycheck, worrying about the choice between a roof over their heads or food on their tables. And the status quo is students continuing to be saddled with massive amounts of debt while bank executives take home record level bonuses. And the status quo is people waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for unemployment assistance under tremendous financial stress that erodes their health. And it's also the sound of fighter jets blaring morning, noon, and night overhead, disturbing the lives of some of the poorest and brownest people in the state while they're stuck home working and learning. And the status quo is a growing police state and a school to prison pipeline that perpetuates oppression that goes back to the very foundation of our economic system, which was built on land that was stolen from indigenous people and on the backs of enslaved people and indentured servants and other low-wage workers. The status quo is the collapse of our ecosystems, climate change, and a way of life out of balance with the web of life and Mother Earth. And for far too long, we've invested the appropriations of our state in an extractive economy that's actually causing many of the problems that we're trying to solve. We're caught in an endless circle of spending money on systems that end up having a great financial, social, emotional, and spiritual cost to people and the planet. And the coronavirus pandemic has only magnified the existing inequities of our extractive economy, which exploits the labor of people and the resources of our planet. When the economy was functioning under normal conditions, we were told that it isn't the time to change. And now the economy is struggling under unprecedented conditions, and yet we are still told it isn't the time for change. And I ask, when will the time for change come? Because we cannot afford to wait any longer. So I hope that we take action in the next session that leads to collective liberation and a sustainable way of life that takes care of everyone on our planet better. In the last two sessions, I worked with my colleagues to pass a variety of laws that did address some of these challenges. For example, the Ethnic Studies Bill, which looks at improving school curriculum to include perspectives of different ethnic and social groups. We replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, and I work with the Abenaki community to pass a bill that will put Abenaki place names on state park signs and give free hunting and fishing licenses to Abenaki people. We worked to pass comprehensive police reform, and with the Racial Justice Alliance, we advocated to to improve training and body cameras and some other practices like banning facial recognition until there's a better sense of the risks of that technology in terms of bias. And looking forward, I would like to fight for a truth and reconciliation process for slavery and reparations such as Black, Indigenous, and people of color land ownership and other economic development opportunities. We need a truth and reconciliation process for colonization, and we need to look at repatriation of land for Indigenous people and religious freedom and protection. We need to end the war on drugs and decriminalize the possession and use of all drugs, especially plant medicines, and we need to regulate kratom. And we need to expunge records for people who have previous charges. We need to continue to work towards a publicly financed system of healthcare that's universal to everyone. And we need treatment for all people struggling with substance abuse disorder. And last but not least, I would also like to say we need to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy through a process of creating people's assemblies in every region of the state that builds a people's budget every year for the next 30 years with a laser focus on shifting to a 90% regenerative economy by 2050. And just one last thing I'll throw out there, because I don't know how much time I have, but I'll stop after this, I promise, is that I worked to pass the first law in the United States on a state level to create an artificial intelligence task force. And now 7 states are also looking at this kind of legislation. And I served on the Vermont Artificial Intelligence Task Force, and our report is being looked at by people around the world as an example of some of the recommendations globally people should be doing with AI. And I'm part of a transatlantic fellowship now working on international AI policies. So I plan to come back with some fresh ideas from that, including some ideas around algorithmic accountability and what the state can do to set an example for the country around making sure any kind of AI technology we use is minimizing the risk of bias and maximizing the benefits to people and to our planet. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, Selena, if you would like to go.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here with all of you. I looked in the attendee list and I think I know most of you, so I'm not going to do a lengthy introduction to myself, but just I'll say that I'm Selena Colburn. As Brian mentioned, I'm a Chittenden 6-4 rep. If I'm reelected this term and we don't have an opponent, I'll be heading into my 3rd term in the legislature and served 2 terms as a Burlington City Councilor for Ward 1 and then the East District prior to that. I actually was born and raised in Burlington and sort of came of age here when Bernie Sanders was mayor, and was lucky enough to participate in really amazing, innovative programs that he brought forward for youth under the auspices of the mayor's youth office. And I think that was a really early seed for me in thinking about what good government can do when it really tries to center the needs of the people it serves. So that's been a kind of a flashpoint for me in all of my work. I'm a member of the library faculty at the University of Vermont when I'm not in the legislature, and I have also teach in the dance program there, and then have 2 daughters who are growing up here in Burlington and go to Edmonds Middle School and Burlington High School. And the thing that I'm thinking a lot heading into the next biennium, as we all are, of course, is the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis and what it's revealed to us. I think it's really showed us what the inequities in our system look like, and has widened those inequities. So we've seen, food insecurity heightened in the state as people stand or wait in line in their cars for food access because of loss of income. We've seen how deep the racial disparities in our healthcare system are, and how disproportionately people of color have been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis here in Vermont, a story that's playing out nationally. We've seen that our essential frontline workers, often our lowest paid workers, have again and again, in so many ways, been the people who have paid the highest cost, taken the highest risks, and done the most to keep our economy afloat, and are the ones who are struggling to get by, often day to day, on wages that just aren't livable. And so I'm very aware that as we head into the next biennium, we're doing so with some pretty significant revenue shortfalls, and that we may be looking at some state budgeting that really tries to, that some might call austerity budgeting, that really we may need to be looking at some cuts, some retrenchments, some pretty scary things. We've been able to have the benefit of a fair amount of federal relief aid, but there's no guarantee that that's coming for us in a significant 2nd or 3rd round. And so as we look at next year, I am really kind of laser focused on thinking about how we do our budgeting process from start to finish in a way that helps us address these inequities rather than widens them. And I think part of what that looks like is really, of course, looking at our priorities, what we're spending money on. I think Barbara mentioned things like the prison system, you know, how much are we spending on marketing or paying out-of-state Vermonters, out-of-state folks to come and live in Vermont when the people who are already here can't get by. Those are certainly things we need to look at, but I think we also really need to start to look at the issue of how we're willing to raise revenue in the state so that we can not just sort of skate by through this crisis, but really address these inequities. So to me, that looks like things like looking at those federal tax breaks that some of the wealthiest Vermonters have gotten under the Trump administration and seeing if the state can reclaim some of that so we can really make strategic investments. It means looking at our education finance system, which for too long has placed the bulk of its burdens on middle income earners in our state, and thinking about whether we can shift to a more progressive model that's based on income and not just on property taxes, and that starts to ask people at the higher end of the earnings, like truly the higher end, to pay more of their fair share of their income towards our education system. I think we're seeing all kinds of folks moving in from out of state, buying up homes, second homes. It looks like, I think, being willing to have some conversations about how, you know, really highly valued properties like $1 million and more, whether we're willing to enact some taxes or fees on the sale or ownership of those kinds of properties, particularly when they are second homes for people. All of those things have been things that have been really off the table for the 4 years that I've been in the legislature. And I think it's time that we have to get them on the table. We heard a lot about the value of maintaining the status quo, of maintaining a steady state budget. And I think the thing that we've all learned, I hope, in last year is that the status quo and the steady state is not something to celebrate right now. It's something we need to reverse and turn around. So I'm coming into the next biennium with a laser focus, really thinking about how we build more momentum, more of a progressive coalition beyond sort of the party label of Democrats and progressives and even Republicans and independents, to really start to get some of this work done and have meaningful conversations about how to move it forward. With Barbara, I also serve on the House Judiciary Committee, and a big focus of my work has been looking at our criminal injustice system and thinking about the very significant changes we need to make there. I see that Skylar Nash is or was on the call at one point, and he's been just such a leader in the state as a student at UVM on these issues. I really want to thank him for his work. I think we need more investments in restorative justice, less incarceration. So I've often introduced, as has Barbara, and we've been good co-sponsors, and Brian too, on a number of pieces of legislation that really look at what is it that may not need to be criminalized? Where can we really reduce sentences? Where can we start to move to more restorative approaches? To that end, Senator Baruth and I actually worked over the last year with a number of folks on coming up with some strategies for addressing campus sexual harm. And we were part of a task force that we moved forward, and there were many findings and some disagreements within that task force, but one place of consensus was that there was a real interest in moving forward more restorative approaches to sexual harm in campus settings, particularly in light of some of the new federal guidelines that have come down that are going to make it really hard for people to bring cases forward in those settings. And then the final thing I'll say is that I am going to continue to be a very active member of the legislature's Climate Solutions Caucus. I'm currently on the leadership team of that group with Senator Pearson, as serve as the clerk, and was happy to be a lead co-sponsor twice of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which we were finally able to bring to fruition. I'm not going to let up because we passed that. I'm looking at, like Brian talked about, what does it mean to really move us away from an extractive economy into a truly regenerative economy? What might elements of a forward-thinking Green New Deal look like for the state of Vermont? So I'll stop there, but those are some of the big areas of focus that I'm thinking about heading into the coming biennium.
Great, thank you. So we can use this last couple of minutes for questions. If anyone has them, feel free to raise your hand using the hand raise function. If anyone has any questions. I am not seeing any so far. Last call for questions. If you are having trouble finding the hand raise function, you can always unmute yourself as well. Amanda, I see you have your hand raised. Feel free to speak.
I would have actually liked, in retrospect, I would have liked to have asked senators this also. But I'm thinking ahead to this, from the census to redistricting, which may also affect you guys. And I'm wondering, I know as a member of the Ward 2-3 NPA, Jean O'Sullivan has had like a teeny tiny corner, and then there just doesn't seem to be a very good overlap between the wards and the districts. And I'm wondering just what's being done in general about redistricting, and what the state legislature and the legislators are thinking about that. And then specifically for Burlington, would it be possible? Do you imagine it would be possible to have better matching of the city wards and the state districts, or if it's even important? And then also what you think about representation, just in general for the state, and how can redistricting be done so that you guys can best represent your constituents?
So any of you feel free to take that if you'd like.
I know that the last time that there was reapportionment, it was right before I was elected. So none of us, if I don't know who's still here from the Senate, but none of us have been here through this process. So basically, my understanding from last time is that the city of Burlington, there was a committee of the city of Burlington, and Selena, maybe you were involved as the city councilor, that worked on part of the plan that went back to the state. So I think we still need to get all the census information. Last time they made some adjustments because a couple of legislators represented part of Winooski and part of Burlington, and they were trying to consolidate. Since then, the city council redid the city districts. So Selena, you may be able to add more from the city perspective, but I don't know that we're going to be doing a lot about it in the beginning of the biennium.
So what I know, I have not been involved with redistricting actually at the state or the city level when I was a city councilor. But the process Barbara described is what I understand. I'm sorry that Senator Pearson and others who have been through it aren't here, because they could probably give us a much more nuanced take on it. But there is a citywide committee that does the first pass at this and then brings some recommendations to the state. I believe it goes through the government operations committees, and there's then further work done in the legislature to finalize things. I believe that the city committee has already been appointed. I'm not sure who all the members are. I know that former city councilor Adjourn is on that committee, and others, I'm not sure. But so I believe the city committee has already been created. And there are many parts to your question, Amanda. I don't know how possible it will be to map legislative districts to city wards. That's a big and good question. I think the the math is just a little different for how many how that representation is supposed to work. I know that when towards the end of my time on city council, the amount of folks I was representing it was actually more than I currently represent as a legislator. So fun for you, Jack Hanson, in that district seat. So I think, and the question of just how to be more representative, how to represent things well, I'm not sure I 100% understood that question, but I think to really get at the answer to that question,
I'm
maybe.
not really sure I did either, because I don't fully understand it, but I was just sort of wanted to get your thought, because I know it's coming up and it is important. And I know with the redistricting of the wards, that I wasn't really involved, but I know it was very contentious and confusing for people. And so.
Yeah, I think I guess the editorial comment I would make, and then I'll ask Brian to weigh in with any thoughts he has, is I think to really get at the question of how to have a truly representative legislature, it's probably less a question about how we draw the district lines and more a question about how we compensate legislators, how we structure things, how we make it possible to serve in that body without needing to have an enormous amount of privilege, personal assets, sort of ability to manage your own schedule around this very part-time legislature and either retain a job or honestly, in many cases, just not need a second job and be able to live on the very limited income that the legislature provides. I think addressing those questions is how we get to true representation in that body, and we certainly don't have it now.
Yeah, I would like to add to that and maybe take it in a little bit different direction with the topic of representation. That if there's one thing I've learned through this coronavirus pandemic, it's that we can use technology to change the functioning of government and public engagement. And although I do miss seeing people in person, and I would have loved to be eating like celery and carrots and cheese in the hospital cafeteria or hospital community room with you all right now, whispering and like making eye contact with people across the room and rolling our eyes during presentations and all the fun things of being in person, that Zoom has allowed people who are normally left out to be in the process. Like every committee is recorded and visible now. Every floor session is visible, not just on NPR, but recorded. And so there's ways we could use technology moving forward to improve public engagement, which improves the functioning of a representative democracy. And I would go even a little further. And I would say like that we have in Burlington these neighborhood planning assemblies where neighborhoods can come together and make some decisions. We should be increasing the direct power of those groups to make decisions that are affecting your lives. And when we talk about the idea of a regenerative economy, one idea is H.868, an act relating to a regenerative economy. It would actually, in that bill, it would implement regional people's assemblies that align with the regional planning commissions, and those people's assemblies would be involved in making regional regenerative economy plans that the state would integrate into a roadmap. And so I'm not saying that's the way to go, but that idea of finding more ways to increase direct democracy and perhaps and then there would be a way for people to be more connected with the development of a people's budget. And so the role of legislators and the power of legislators could be reduced and the power of people could be increased. And so I just think coming out of the pandemic, we need to be thinking creatively about how to improve public engagement and increase the power of people in democracy outside of the traditional pathways of representation. That's just my thoughts on the issue of representation.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Jack, yeah.
Sorry to keep us over time, but I think it's a really important point to hit because the election is 3 weeks away. And Trump is indicating that he's not going to concede, essentially, regardless of the outcome on election day. So I'm just wondering, I think we all need to be asking ourselves this in terms of how we respond in that event. It's pretty uncharted territory and really scary for our democracy if that happens. And I'm wondering if those conversations are happening among legislators at this point of how we respond in that event. If Trump essentially loses but doesn't concede.
I have had conversations with other legislators. I don't know if there's been any formal discussion as a body or within committees about this topic, but I know within some of our caucuses, like our smaller groups and alliances, there has been some discussion. I know that, for example, I'm the co-chair of the Working Vermonters Caucus, which is a caucus of labor unions and advocates, and that there are union members currently organizing to defend democracy if need be. And there's unions talking with representatives about what workers might do in the face of a coup, for example. And I know that it's come up in the Social Equity Caucus because there's been a rise in hate crimes, and Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, we've been experiencing more acts of hatred in Vermont lately. And we have concerns about people's safety in the face of a coup and what that might mean, especially with the threads of white supremacy running through this whole national debate and the civil unrest. So there has been some talk in that caucus about, what would people do if there's problems with the election? And there's been a lot of, in that sense, I've talked with a lot of colleagues about what are the procedures in place to defend our democracy in terms of the role of the judiciary, the role of state legislatures, the role of state governors, the role of Congress and the Supreme Court. There are many checks and balances in place to resist an executive coup, but something people need to realize is that if the Supreme Court is stacked in favor of the current president, that they can rule as they choose. And in the end, if there's anything with a contested election, that's the last stop is the Supreme Court. So what are we gonna do if we disagree with the outcome of a stacked Supreme Court? And I think that's, that it's complicated. But that being said, I've had a lot of conversations with colleagues individually and in these groups, and I don't know if that answers the question to the extent you wanted, but there is discussion out there. And I think my greatest hope out there is in our unions and in our workers, because our workers have the power to bring the economy to its knees if we need to. And if you look at what stopped other fascist coups in the world and in history, it's mass action of regular people just refusing to comply. Usually slowing things down allows time for all votes to be counted, allows time for the process of democracy to play out. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would just add, I'm not aware of like a group of legislators that's like, okay, we're sitting down and figuring this out. Maybe that is happening. But certainly there have been conversations in various caucuses about it. I also know, and like Brian, I've been looking at, I think there's some really good organizing that is based in evidence of what has prevented coups from occurring in other countries. There's an organization called Choose Democracy that I encourage you all to Google and look at. You could just Google Choose Democracy coup, where you can sign a pledge that you're willing to resist. And they have some really good, really truly grounded in research tips about how to organize around this. Our colleague actually in the House Progressive Caucus, Diana Gonzalez, has a good friend who's involved in that organizing effort. Locally, VPIRG has joined a coalition of over 100 organizations around the country that are also organizing around this. It's called, I think they're organizing under the auspices of Protect the Results. And so they have actually already organized some events and sort of created Facebook events, reserved space, reserved times for people to be able to come together if there's not a peaceful transfer of power and that there's not a willingness to accept election results. And so there is organization happening on this. I definitely heard from VPIRG, and I know that a number of other legislatures did, to alert us to the work, this effort. And so there is work starting to move forward on this. It's really important. What a good question. And what a wild question to be asking ourselves.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised, and we're over time, so I think we can wrap it up. There was a lot of individuals that spoke tonight, so if anyone watching wants the emails to get in contact with any of the elected officials or soon to be, please reach out to anyone on the steering committee and we'll be able to connect you. But other than that, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I think this was really productive. So yeah, thank you everyone.